October 14th, 1943. Schweinfurt, Germany. At 25,000 feet, Oberleutnant Heinz Bär guided his Messerschmitt Bf 109 through the contrail-streaked sky, hunting American bombers like a seasoned predator stalking wounded prey. That day, he logged his 17th heavy bomber killer B-17 Flying Fortress, trailing smoke and fire as it spiraled toward the earth below. For Bär and his fellow Luftwaffe pilots, this wasn't desperation. This was routine. The American bomber formations, stripped of fighter escort deep over Germany, were defenseless. Their vaunted 50 caliber guns and tight formations meant nothing against coordinated attacks by experienced German aces. The Allies called it Black Thursday. They lost 60 bombers and 600 crewmen in a single day, unsustainable losses that threatened to end the entire daylight bombing campaign. In the Luftwaffe ready rooms that evening, there was laughter. Contemptuous, confident laughter. The Americans kept sending their flying fortresses to die over the Rhine, and German pilots kept shooting them down. Some joked about the bombers being nothing more than target practice once they crossed into German airspace alone. One pilot was recorded saying, "Let them come, we know exactly where their escorts turned back. After that, they're ours." The German fighter arm felt invincible. They had perfected their tactics, built an intricate air defense network called the Kammhuber Line, and accumulated hundreds of experienced aces. The Reich's airspace seemed an impenetrable fortress, but unseen across the English Channel, American engineers and British visionaries were forging a response that would turn those confident smiles into looks of pure dread. The Allied bombing campaign had a fatal flaw, and every German pilot knew it range. American fighters like the P-47 Thunderbolt and British Spitfires were excellent dogfighters, powerful, maneuverable, deadly in combat. But they couldn't fly deep into Germany. Their fuel tanks limited them to roughly 200-300 miles from base, meaning they could barely reach the German border before having to turn back. This created what bomber crews grimly called the death zone, that vast stretch of airspace over Germany where they flew alone, unprotected, sitting ducks for German interceptors. The Kammhuber Line, named after General Joseph Kammhuber, was a sophisticated radar-guided defense network stretching from Denmark to Switzerland. German ground controllers could track incoming bombers and vector fighters to intercept with deadly precision. Combined with experienced pilots flying superior aircraft, it was a killing machine. The psychological toll on bomber crews was crushing. Pilots and gunners knew that past a certain point, usually somewhere over Belgium or Western Germany, their little friends would waggle their wings in farewell and turn for home. After that, survival became a matter of luck. Mission after mission, losses mounted. 5%, 10%, sometimes 15% casualty rates on single raids. At those numbers, statistically, a bomber crew had almost no chance of surviving their required 25-mission tour. Some crews were shot down on their very first mission. For the Luftwaffe, it was a golden age. They could choose when and where to attack, knowing the bombers had no protection. German aces racked up kill scores that would have been unthinkable in any other theatre of war. But this dominance was about to end in the most dramatic fashion imaginable. In 1940, Britain's Air Purchasing Commission approached North American Aviation with an urgent request: build us a new fighter based on the Curtiss P-40 design. North American's president, James Dutch Kindleberger, made a counter-proposal that seemed insane. Give us 120 days, and we'll design and build you something better from scratch. In wartime, such promises usually meant disaster. Aircraft development typically took years, not months. But Kindleberger had assembled a brilliant team of engineers, and they delivered. The N-Aminus 73X prototype, later named the Mustang, flew in just 102 days. The early P-51 was promising but flawed. Its sleek airframe and revolutionary laminar flow wing gave it exceptional speed and range at low altitude. But it was powered by the American Allison V-1000 710 engine, which had a critical weakness. Above 15,000 feet, it lost power dramatically. Without a supercharger efficient at high altitude, the early Mustang was fast at low level, but if gasped for air where it mattered most at the 25,000–30,000 feet where bomber formations and German interceptors operated. It was relegated to low altitude reconnaissance and ground attack roles, unable to fulfill the desperate need for bomber escort. The solution came from an unlikely source: British engineering genius meeting American manufacturing might. Ronald Harker, a test pilot for Rolls-Royce, visited North American's facility in 1942 and saw the P-51's potential immediately. He had one radical suggestion: replace the Allison engine with Britain's legendary Rolls-Royce Merlin. The Merlin engine was already famous for powering the Spitfire and Hurricane. But its true advantage wasn't just horsepower, it was its two-stage, two-speed supercharger, an engineering marvel that compressed then high-altitude air before forcing it into the engine. This meant the Merlin maintained power output at extreme altitudes where conventional engines suffocated. Think of it this way: a normal engine at 30,000 feet is like an athlete trying to run at the summit of Mount Everest. The Merlin's supercharger was like giving the athlete sea-level air pressure, no matter how high they climbed. When North American engineers, working with Packard, which built the Merlin under license as the V-1650, installed this power plant into the P-51's airframe, the results were revolutionary. Speed at altitude jumped to 440 plus mph at 30,000 feet, faster than nearly every German fighter. Climb rate became blistering, allowing rapid engagement or disengagement. The already excellent range was optimized further by the Merlin's fuel efficiency. But the Mustang had one more trick: its laminar flow wing. Unlike conventional wings that created turbulent airflow, the Mustang's wing was designed to maintain smooth, laminar flow over most of its surface. This drastically reduced drag, allowing the aircraft to fly farther and faster on the same fuel. Combined with drop tanks, disposable external fuel tanks that could be jettisoned before combat, the P-51 achieved an unprecedented combat radius of over 750 miles. That meant a Mustang could fly from England to Berlin and back, with fuel to spare for combat. The death zone was about to close. Hauptmann Erich Hartmann, who would become the highest scoring ace in history, remembered the first encounters with an uneasy clarity. Reports came in of American fighters operating far deeper than we thought possible. At first we didn't believe it. Their P-47s and Spitfires always turned back at the same point, but these new aircraft, they kept coming. December 1943 marked the first operational P-51 Mustang missions deep into Germany. The initial encounters were confusing for German pilots. These weren't the familiar limited-range escorts. These fighters were appearing over targets hundreds of miles inside the right places that should have been sanctuaries. One German pilot reported, "It came from nowhere, struck like lightning, and disappeared before we could react. It was faster than our Bf-109s at altitude, more maneuverable than we expected. Where did it come from? Why wasn't it running out of fuel?" The early engagements weren't yet devastating in numbers, but they planted seeds of doubt. The psychological superiority the Luftwaffe had enjoyed to that smug certainty that Allied fighters had to turn back began to erode. Luftwaffe commanders received bewildered reports from their pilots. Something had changed. The rules of engagement they'd operated under for years no longer applied. The laughter in the ready rooms grew quieter. If December 1943 planted doubt, March 6, 1940 foreshadowed illusions entirely. On that day, 660 American heavy bombers struck Berlin in daylight for the first time with full fighter escort. Not just to the German border, all the way to the capital and back. For Berliners and Luftwaffe pilots alike, seeing P-51 Mustangs dogfighting over the Reichstag was a psychological earthquake. Berlin, the heart of the Third Reich, had been considered beyond the reach of American fighter escorts. It was supposed to be safe. Luftwaffe pilot Werner Shaw later recalled, "When I saw the American fighters over Berlin, I knew in my heart that we had lost the war. There was no place left to hide." The implications were immediate and devastating. German fighters now had to engage Allied escorts on equal or worse terms, deep in their own territory. Bomber formations with aggressive fighter support could strike any target in Germany. The Luftwaffe's home field advantage evaporated. German citizens looked up and saw their vaunted air force being systematically destroyed. The P-51s didn't just escort, they hunted. They ranged ahead of bomber formations, sweeping the skies, attacking German airfields, intercepting enemy fighters as they tried to climb to intercept altitude. The hunted had become the hunters. February 20-25, 1944. Big week. Operation Argument was designed not just to destroy German industry, but to annihilate the Luftwaffe itself. For 6 consecutive days, thousands of Allied bombers, protected by hundreds of P-51 Mustangs, struck aircraft factories, ball bearing plants, and assembly facilities across Germany. The Luftwaffe had no choice but to rise and defend. It was a slaughter. In those 6 days, over 600 German fighters were destroyed. More critically, 1,000 Luftwaffe aircrew were killed, wounded, or captured. The loss rate among experienced pilots was catastrophic. Hermann Göring, head of the Luftwaffe, refused to believe the reports. He famously raged, "If there are more than 100 P-51s over Germany, I'll eat my hat and admit defeat." But the numbers were undeniable. The Luftwaffe was being bled to death, not just in aircraft, but in its most precious resource, trained, experienced pilots. New pilots, some with as little as 50 hours of flight training, were rushed into combat against Allied veterans with hundreds of hours. The veterans called them kindergarten children sent to die. Oberst G and the Roll, third high-scoring German ace with 275 victories. Put it bluntly, we were sending boys to fight men, and the Mustangs were waiting for them. The German pilots who survived Big Week were never the same. The confidence was gone, replaced by grim determination and, increasingly, fatalism. The Mustang's dominance came from 3 revolutionary elements working in concert. 1. The armament. 6 50 caliber Browning machine guns delivered devastating firepower. Unlike heavier cannons that offered slower rates of fire, the 50 cals could put out 800 rounds per minute per gun, a literal stream of heavy metal that could saw through any German aircraft. 2. They came in as 14 gyroscopic gun sights. This was a game changer. The K-14 was a computing gun sight that calculated lead automatically. The pilot simply set the target wingspan, and the sight projected where to aim to hit a maneuvering target. It turned average pilots into deadly marksmen and made aces nearly unstoppable. 3. The new doctrine, find and destroy. Under Major General Jimmy Doolittle's command, P-51 pilots received revolutionary orders: don't just defend the bombers, hunt German fighters wherever they are. Mustangs ranged far ahead of bomber streams, sweeping vast areas of sky, attacking German airfields during takeoff and landing when aircraft were most vulnerable, and pursuing fleeing German fighters back to their bases. German pilots could no longer retreat to safety. There was no sanctuary. The Mustangs were everywhere. Listen to the words of Oberleutnant Heinz Bär, the same pilot who once laughed at defenseless bombers. Before the Mustang, we were wolves hunting sheep. After the Mustang, we became the sheep, always looking over our shoulders, always running. Every sortie might be your last. We knew it. We felt it in our bones. The psychological transformation was complete and crushing. Constant fear. Mustangs could appear from any direction, at any altitude. No safe haven, even over friendly airfields. P-51s hunted. Exhaustion. Physical and mental fatigue from sustained combat stress. Loss of comrades. Watching experienced pilots, men who'd survived hundreds of missions, disappear in flames. Hopelessness, the mathematical certainty of eventual death. General Adolf Galland, one of Germany's most celebrated aces and a brilliant tactical mind, said it plainly. The day we saw the Mustang in numbers over the Ruhr, we knew the war was lost. There was nothing we could do. This wasn't tactical defeat, it was strategic surrender from the highest levels of command. Young German pilots, many still teenagers, were sent up knowing they likely wouldn't return. Squadron after squadron was decimated. The Luftwaffe's carefully built cadre of experienced instructors and aces was destroyed, impossible to replace. By mid-1944, every German fighter pilot understood the sky over Germany had become the graveyard, and the Mustang was the grave digger. With Mustangs dominating the skies, Allied bombers gained freedom to strike previously unreachable targets. The most devastating campaign targeted Germany's lifeblood, oil. Refineries, synthetic fuel plants, storage depots systematically destroyed. Without fuel, panzer divisions couldn't move. U-boats couldn't sail. Luftwaffe fighters, no matter how advanced, stayed grounded. The impact was immediate. By summer 1944, German pilot training was cut from 240 hours to 110 hours due to fuel shortages. Experienced pilots couldn't practice. New pilots went into combat barely able to fly. This air superiority made D-Day possible. On June 6, 1944, when Allied forces stormed Normandy beaches, the Luftwaffe managed only about 100 sorties, total a pathetic showing against the overwhelming Allied air power. German soldiers looked up, expecting air support, and saw only American and British aircraft. The Mustang's domination of German skies had created the conditions for invasion. Germany's response was technologically brilliant but strategically irrelevant. The Me-262 jet fighter. The Me-262 Schwalbe was a marvel, the world's first operational jet fighter capable of 540 mph, faster than any piston-engined aircraft. Alongside it came the Me-163 Comet rocket interceptor, reaching an astounding 700 mph. For a brief moment, German pilots thought they'd found salvation. They were wrong. The Me-262 suffered from fatal flaws. Production only till the 1400 built versus 15,000 plus Mustangs. Reliability: jet engines failed constantly, lasting only 10 minutes 25 flight hours. Fuel: chronic shortages due to Allied bombing kept them grounded. Vulnerability: during takeoff and landing, they were slow and defenseless. P-51 pilots quickly learned to wait above Me-262 airfields. When the jets took off or came into land, Mustangs pounced. The advanced jet fighters, symbols of technological superiority, were slaughtered by obsolete piston fighters using simple tactics. As Galland described the frustration, the Me-262 was the future, but the Mustangs controlled the present, and there was nothing we could do about it. Technology alone couldn't overcome numbers, logistics, and relentless tactical pressure. By 1944, the mathematics of the air war were brutally simple. Allied production, 96,000 aircraft per year, US alone. German production, 40,000 aircraft per year peak. For every German fighter produced, multiple Allied aircraft entered service. But aircraft could be replaced. Pilots couldn't. During Big Week alone, Germany lost over 1,000 trained aircrew, a generation of experience erased in 6 days. New pilots, the kindergarten, received as little as 50 hours of training before facing Allied veterans with 300 plus hours. Yellen lamented, "We're sending children to fight masters." Individual German aces like Erich Hartmann continued to achieve incredible scores. Hartmann alone claimed 352 victories. But personal heroics couldn't change the equation. For every ace, dozens of inexperienced pilots died within their first 10 missions. German airfields became conveyor belts of death. Fresh pilots arrived, flew a few missions, and were shot down. The cycle repeated, endlessly grinding the Luftwaffe into dust. By late 1944, the Luftwaffe was effectively broken. Not because German pilots lacked skill or courage, but because they were outnumbered, outproduced, and outmaneuvered by an enemy that controlled the skies through industrial might under the dominance of one aircraft, the P-51 Mustang. Post-war interviews with surviving Luftwaffe aces reveals a unanimous conclusion. The P-51 Mustang had broken the German Air Force. General Adolf Galland: "When I saw the Mustangs over Berlin, I knew the war was lost. They could reach anywhere, fight anywhere, stay as long as needed. We had no answer." Oberst G. and the rolled 275 victories. The Mustang was death incarnate. It pursued us to our airfield, waited for us to land, hunted us at any altitude. There was no escape. We simply had no answer to its combination of range, speed, and numbers. Major Walter Krupinski. We feared the Mustang more than any other aircraft, not because it was invincible, we shot down plenty, but because it was everywhere. You could never relax, never feel safe. It broke men's spirits. Even Aero Charman, the highest scoring ace in history with 352 victories, acknowledged, still could overcome individual disadvantages, but against overwhelming numbers of well-trained pilots and superior aircraft, no amount of skill could win that war. These weren't excuses or propaganda. These were professional warriors acknowledging that they'd been beaten by superior strategy, technology, and industrial capacity epitomized by a single aircraft. The laughter that echoed through Luftwaffe ready rooms in 1943 had been replaced by silence. The P-51 Mustang fundamentally transformed air warfare doctrine. Strategic impact. Proved deep penetration fighter escort was possible and decisive. Enabled strategic bombing campaigns to succeed. Demonstrated that air superiority could be projected hundreds of miles. Made D-Day possible through air dominance. Technical achievement. Revolutionary laminar flow wing design. Optimal integration of Anglo-American engineering. Set new standards for range, speed, and high-altitude performance. Over 15,000 built testament to American industrial capacity. Doctrinal shift. Changed fighter tactics from defensive escort to offensive sweep. Established find and destroy as Bible strategy. Proved that technological innovation combined with industrial might could overcome enemy advantages. General Dwight D. Eisenhower later stated, "The P-51 Mustang was one of the decisive weapons of World War II. It helped us gain air superiority, without which D-Day would have been impossible." The Mustang represented the zenith of piston engine fighter design. Ironically, its very success accelerated the transition to jets. Engineers sought to surpass the limitations the Mustang had essentially perfected within the constraints of propeller-driven technology. Conclusion: from contempt to dread. In October 1943, Oberleutnant Heinz Bär laughed as he shot down his 17th American bomber over Schweinfurt. The sky belonged to the Luftwaffe, and nothing could challenge their dominance. 18 months later, in April 1945, the few surviving German fighter pilots hid their aircraft in forests, unable to fly due to fuel shortages, hunted relentlessly by waves of American fighters, most of the Mustangs. The transformation was complete. The P-51 Mustang didn't just shoot down German aircraft. It shattered German air power, destroyed the Luftwaffe's psychological superiority, enabled the strategic bombing campaign, and made the liberation of Europe possible. It turned contemptuous laughter into profound dread. One aircraft, one mission, changed everything. The silver fighter with the checkered nose and Mustang remains the aircraft that truly won a war in the skies over Europe. And